Africa's mining sector remains key if the economy is to create jobs. In the State of the Nation address last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasizing that the mining sector in the country is not a sunset industry. So, what plans are there to boost this sector and avoid the looming job losses? In conversation now, we're joined by the Minerals Council of South Africa CEO, Mzila Mthenjane. Mr. Mthenjane, thank you very much for your time. You've just returned from the mining indaba in Cape Town. Did you get a sense that there is alignment between government and the private sector as a whole in terms of pushing ahead with undoing the obstacles with the ultimate goal of creating jobs?
Toli, thank you very much for having me on your show. I'll respond to that question at two levels. I think firstly, globally, in the context of the conversation on critical minerals and the need for these minerals to ensure that we transition, one of my key conclusions from the conference was that we can only achieve this transition through collaboration and alignment across the globe in terms of different partners, but I think more importantly, between private sector and public sector. If I bring it closer to home, if you look at how private sector has been working with government in terms of addressing what we call are the enabling factors of the economy, and specifically Transnet and Eskom, which are key public sector infrastructure that have really constrained the performance of the mining industry in the past 2 to 3 years. We can only get better by working together with government, and we actually have no option but to align. And I think with what we've been able to demonstrate recently through BUSA and government through the Joint Strategic Oversight Committee, I think that alignment is really coming through and becoming embedded.
Yeah. If you factor in exactly what you have just touched on, the energy crisis, it would seem at one point that our officials in government are trying very hard to paint the narrative of an Eskom that is improving. But when you look at just this weekend alone, it fills your heart with despair. You look at the dysfunction in the logistics sector. Can you really say that South Africa is still an attractive destination for mining?
So I often say to myself, just to remind, of the reality we find ourselves in, that I don't think we yet have a full appreciation of the amount of, I think, physical and human capacity damage that was done by state capture. And it's really going to begin to emerge as we try to fix it. So there's no doubt that, whilst on the one hand, there's work being done, there's effort, there's investment by, private sector in both institutions, Transnet and Eskom, in investing to fix it. We are challenged by the day-to-day issues, of load shedding, which moved, I think it's up to stage 6. I hope I'm wrong. And so that is what is top of mind for people. But from a leadership perspective, mindful of the short-term issues, we have to keep that medium to longer term perspective and continue to put in the effort to get us out of the situation that we find ourselves in, because we do not accept as leaders in business, certainly, and certainly leaders in public sector, that this is going to be a permanent situation. It cannot be.
Let's talk about the delayed exploration permits. Can you give us just a fair idea of how bad this is? And do you think that the Minister of Minerals and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, through his actions, do you think that he is now beginning to deal with this decisively?
So I think in the first instance, it's really sad that we have, more than 2,000 prospecting and mining permits outstanding, which, even if it's over a period of 6 months or 12 months, is unacceptable in my view, and I'll tell you why I say that. The prospect to find a mine, to find commodities and to potentially build a mine is actually the prospect for the very thing that we all want, which is employment creation. And so if you have more than 2,000 prospecting and mining permits outstanding, first and foremost, we say, what is the capital that is trapped that could have been invested at a time when we desperately need investment as a country and as an industry? Secondly, the prospect of developing new mines means that this is an industry that is actually poised for growth. In your introduction and also referring to the President's talk at the Mining Indaba, there was mention of a sunset industry. The mining industry in South Africa is not a sunset industry. Let's not be fooled by the recent decline. I think we're very concerned about the decline. But a sunset industry, maybe just to offer the audience a definition, is an industry, whether mining or not, where opportunities have been exhausted and there are no longer any opportunities that can be found. And so it's an industry that will be managed down by those who operate in it. From a mining minerals council perspective and on behalf of the industry, we are not a sunset industry. We are an industry that is suffering the inefficiencies of key infrastructure. As a result, we are showing decline in our output, but it's something which we are working with government on in order to make sure that we arrest the decline and begin to inject confidence in investors to sink money, I'll put it bluntly and rather literally, into the ground in order to grow this industry much further. And so the effort that the ministry has put in terms of this cadastral system, that's a welcome milestone for us. Yes, it's long outstanding, but we're on the right direction.
Yeah. All right. I'll take your word, because you're the expert here, when you say your industry is not a sunset industry. But if we shift the conversation to the jobs bloodbath, well, not yet. You have warned that the platinum sector, there's about 7,000 jobs there that could be on the line. You're going to give us reasons why that is. The NUM, on the other hand, is cautioning that there are some 10,000 jobs that could be lost in the sector as a whole. Why is that happening?
Okay, great question. So firstly, let's not take one commodity as representative of the whole industry. I think we're fortunate as a country. We have a very diversified mining industry, from precious metals in terms of gold, platinum, to bulk commodities such as coal, iron ore, manganese, and we have, a little bit of copper. We've got some zinc and several other commodities. And each one of these has really been experiencing the structural constraints differently. They've been responding to some of the market challenges differently. So let's start with gold. Gold is a commodity which South Africa has been mining for more than 130 years. In fact, the Minerals Council itself is about as old as the gold industry, more than 130 years. And it's an industry where, by virtue of its geology, any further gold to be mined goes deeper. We're talking in excess of 3,500 to 4,000 meters below ground. And that's going to be impossible given current technology. And so that's an industry that has been in decline. The platinum industry is faced with a structural issue where previously it was driven by the potential demand for platinum in terms of internal combustion engines and for use in diesel engines. We've seen the rise of electric vehicles, which have actually and bode potentially to replace the demand for platinum as, the world moves into electric vehicles and less so on internal combustion engines. And we need to see how that's going to play out. So the market is really foreseeing a situation where there'll be less demand and hence a huge depression on prices of some of the key commodities such as platinum, palladium, and rhodium. And coupled with, the electricity challenges, is really presenting a huge challenge for the platinum industry to continue at its current cost levels. And hence you're seeing this restructuring that's taking place in terms of cost reduction. The outlook for platinum, though, we believe is positive. If you look at fuel cells and hydrogen, and we can make a conversation about that at another time, and you can always invite an expert to come and talk to you about hydrogen energy and the prospects that it has for hydrogen. We need to invest in research. That's another form of exploration. So that bodes well for future employment. And then we look at coal and iron ore, which have been greatly affected by Transnet, where there's excess capacity, and it doesn't look like, we need to stabilize Transnet's performance and then invest. But as we're working on that, companies are also repositioning themselves and wanting to stabilize at unfortunately a lower level than the capacity that they had built. Hence a restructuring as well and looking at cost reduction.
Yeah.
Having said that, we did see some great prices for iron ore, but unfortunately coal did also experience a reduction in prices. But manganese has certainly been a great performer. But there again, there have been some constraints with logistics, including chrome, which is another important commodity for South Africa. So, net of these issues, overall the industry has not seen a significant drop, but let's remind ourselves that it is a cyclical industry. When the market is down, the industry has to restructure and reposition it. And when the market turns again, and when we fix our challenges, I believe the industry will begin to re-employ, as well as investment in growth. It should see a net growth in employment.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've used these two words, Mr. Mthenjane, because this is where much of the time there does appear to be friction. Restructuring and cost reduction. When there's a downturn, a lot of the responsibility to ensure a conducive environment for industry to thrive, that falls on the shoulders of government to provide that conducive environment for business to thrive.
Yeah.
Now, when that environment has been leveled by government so that it is conducive for you to thrive, where do you take responsibility for a jobs bloodbath, or should we say preventing a jobs bloodbath, keeping in mind the words you have used, restructuring and cost reduction?
Yeah. So by the time a company restructures in the form of headcount reduction, that's a last resort. What would have happened before that would have been seeking various other options of reducing costs. And coming out of a big mining company, one of the first things that companies look at when it comes to cutting costs is taking out consultants and other service providers with the view to bringing some of those services internally. And, quite often you find that consultants would have been brought in at a time of expansion of the industry to look at new ways of doing things. The second way in which companies look at reduction of costs is also looking at, bringing down the actual production, which means that it will come down with some variable costs. And in those variable costs, it will be looking at things like supply chain and procurement methods, other services, and all, I must also mention at this point, without compromising safety. And, labor in some of the commodities constitutes about 60 to 70%. So it's quite a huge cost. And so that's where, as a last resort, when you really explored all of your cost reduction mechanisms, you will then look at labor reduction. And even when you do, it's not a blanket reduction of labor. So it's a very phased approach, is looking at natural attrition, providing people with early retirement, voluntary separation, before you get to a rather extreme case of a forced retrenchment.
Yeah.
So it's a very considerate process. Now, I think to your point, it's an unpleasant situation at a time when we're sitting at close to 40% unemployment, the economy is not growing. It does leave people with a bleak future in terms of what are the options to look at. So, we're sitting in a situation where as a country, we do need to have an economic plan that will look at how the mining industry contributes, how other sectors contribute, so that you get this redistribution of labor as one industry or one company comes down for one or other reason, another sector or another company picks up the slack.
Sure.
That's how the industry that's how the economy should grow in order to create employment.
Finally, and very briefly, if you can, you touched on safety. I'd like to end the discussion on this particular question because there does appear to be a new trend, but perhaps you'll tell me it's possibly old. The staging of underground sit-ins for particularly the situations that we've just discussed, when workers' jobs are on the line, they tend to sit underground. It's a very, very dangerous environment. How worried are you about this form of protest and what's being done to try and prevent workers from doing such things?
No, Colin, thank you very much for raising that issue. It is an issue of huge concern to myself, the board of the Minerals Council of South Africa, and members generally of the industry. It's an issue we're trying to really understand in terms of what is the cause of it. Our biggest concern, as you say, is around safety and, more importantly, the health of employees. When you look at the demographics of our employees, it is a rather aged employment base and who will be under prescribed medication. Being held underground like that and not having access to your medication really enhances, or reduces the health condition of that employee and exposes them to huge danger. So we as a Minerals Council and we have started having conversations with the GMRE. We'll be having engagements with labor representatives in a way of trying to get to a solution around preventing of these sit-ins and find different ways of resolving tension and differences where these occur.
Mzila Mthenjane, let me thank you very much for your time. CEO of the Minerals Council of South Africa. We're discussing the future of the mining industry in